Gilbert Keith Chesterton, otherwise known as G.K. Chesterton, was a towering figure in the first half of the 20th century. He was a journalist, a theologian, a philosopher, a poet, a novelist, among many other things. Well, what does he have to say about the need to return to common sense, to battle the moral ills of our day? Well, stay tuned to find out.
In Orthodoxy, he said this was the gigantic secret of the Christian, joy. The Man Who Is Thursday, the novel Chesterton wrote, in which he explored the meaning of his own suffering.
My attraction to Chesterton began, I was home educated all my life, and I think if there's one author I owe my education to, it would be Chesterton. His joy, just if anyone, if any author, any character in history, I know just in his own person, in his writing, the way he carried himself just encapsulated how wonderful, what a happy thing it is to be a Christian.
Standing at 6'4" and weighing 300 pounds, Chesterton was a big man. This same man who cleverly remarked that the Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting, it has been found difficult and left untried. Well, his contribution to society was much bigger than himself. G.K. Chesterton was born in England in the late 19th century and converted to Roman Catholicism in 1922, just 14 years before his death. Chesterton was a prolific writer with hundreds of books or stories and over 4,000 essays, all marked by his style of great wit and humor. But Chesterton didn't just write. He debated with the greatest intellectuals of his time, like George Bernard Shaw and H.G. Wells. He argued passionately against 20th century ills, like materialism, scientific determinism, moral relativism. He defended the common man and common sense. He defended the poor, the family, beauty, Christianity, and the Catholic faith.
Yeah, Chesterton, he said, we live in an age of uncommon nonsense. Yeah, and that is so true. So many people today in the news, you see, they're talking around things in the news media. News corporations are able to tell complete lies, with every day to us. We're not used to using the most basic common sense to think through things, think through the lies the media tell us. But Chesterton, he did. He was a man of great common sense, and he had a huge command of the English language. He was able to express himself very well. He used a lot of paradox. That's one of the ways he uses common sense to just point out sort of hidden truths.
Some people may know him by his popular priest detective series Father Brown, or by the book that contributed to C.S. Lewis's conversion to Christianity, The Everlasting Man. Or sadly, like most, they've never heard of Chesterton at all.
Father Boyd, you devote a lot of your ministry to the Chesterton Institute for Faith and Culture, to being in charge of the Chesterton Review, a highly respected journal, and giving lectures, conferences. Why do you do this specifically for Chesterton?
I believe that Chesterton represents a tradition of renewal for the church in the modern world. The mission of our Chesterton Institute was expressed by T.S. Eliot, a great admirer of Chesterton. And at the time of Chesterton's death, Eliot wrote that it was important to continue in our day the work that Chesterton began in his. So the Chesterton Institute seeks to continue that work.
Now, I know many other writers spoke against the same things Chesterton spoke about, against moral relativism, secularism, social injustices. Now, why specifically him?
Perhaps the importance of Chesterton would be better understood if we thought of a writer who continued Chesterton's work. C.S. Lewis regarded himself as a disciple of Chesterton. Chesterton believed that what people needed more than anything was to recover a sense of wonder. That is, to discover the presence of God in the world from which God seemed to be absent. He said that to find God means finding good, and finding the good in people is to find God. He said this requires a special kind of insight. Chesterton once wrote, he gave a little a child a gift of a picture book, but he said here was his advice to the child. He said, "Don't believe in anything that can't be told in colored pictures, through the imagination." So a lot of Chesterton's writing is this indirect evangelization. He tells a story, he writes a poem, and in that he hides Christian truth. This year, 2008, is the 100th anniversary of the writing of Chesterton's, perhaps one of his best novels, called The Man Who Was Thursday. This gives you perhaps a good illustration of how Chesterton sought to evangelize a culture through literature.
Can you talk about why he's so hard to read? Like, for young people to be attracted to him once again, it takes a bit of an effort to understand him, and yet he is so badly needed. His way of thinking, his way of reasoning. So how can you, what do you suggest for our generation?
I suggest that the best way to read Chesterton is to submerge yourself in Chesterton. The difficulty we have when we hear someone who is speaking with an English accent, you adjust your hearing slightly and then you catch on. And when you do, you find that Chesterton is not especially, he's deep, but he's funny. Chesterton believed that the deepest truths are told through jokes. Chesterton said, the opposite of being funny is not being serious. The opposite of being funny is being not funny. That is, that you can be serious and humorous at the same time.
G.K. Chesterton is often called the apostle of common sense. Those who read him and see the truths behind his words, well, what do they have to say?
So how do the two of you know Chesterton?
I think for me, there's not one specific point, but I know in university, my parents very much encouraged me to always seek books that were good, that were truthful, continuing to learn about the faith and beauty and all that kind of thing. And I think I picked up a Chesterton book at one point and just started reading it, just opened it up and read it randomly, and I was just kind of blown away by what I was reading. He was putting things that I'd learned about truth, about the faith, in ways that I'd never heard put before. And I was actually laughing out loud as I was reading it, which to me was quite unusual, to read something that's so true and religious and yet makes you laugh at the same time.
Well, that's funny that you read that in high school, because a lot of people even my age think he's so hard to read. Like, how can you get into somebody like Chesterton?
Well, it'd probably be easier for you because you're already, like, if you're already, there's no barrier with the subject matter, right?
True, yeah.
If you're comfortable with the Catholic faith, a good formation of that, then that's easier for you. For me, it was I'm called I'd call myself a revert, right? So I wasn't always trying to take the faith seriously, and what I said is I was a member of the Mississauga Rite, which is you go to Mass at Christmas and Easter, right? So sometime around fourth year university, I just got really interested in, okay, I want to learn more about the faith. And Chesterton was one of the names that kept coming up with websites and just magazines and things like that. He was referred to a lot. And over the couple of years there, it became clear to me that he was like one of the great Christian writers of the 20th century, him and C.S. Lewis. So for me, I sort of came in a bit later, and I always liked, I kind of like reading sort of serious things, but he's serious but funny at the same time. He makes
serious things fun.
Oh yeah.
And he makes fun things serious. He loves paradoxes, and everything is a paradox with him, but it was not just a paradox that had no answer. It was a paradox that had an answer and was true, and it was commonsensical. You read him, you're like, oh, of course.
Well, that's one thing too, right? There's not only, you mentioned being a revert, and you mentioned being in that sort of Catholic circle, but you don't have to be Catholic to really appreciate Chesterton, because the common sense is something we should all have.
Absolutely.
So what is it about his writing that really sort of portray that common sense, what it is, and
yeah, well, definitely. I mean, a lot of stuff that he wrote. I mean, something I read just recently about him. It said that he is loved by, it's not just Catholics. I mean, a lot of other Christians love his writing as well, and even other just people that just love literature. But So this isn't my idea at all, but I can agree with that. That his defining thing was joy, and just what was it about him? He was a happy man, and that's kind of like a countercultural thing. And he had this. There's this quote. I know this from Peter Kraft, from some of his talks about him, and one of the things that Peter Kraft quotes a lot about Chesterton is he said that paganism was a big thing, Christianity was bigger, and everything since has been comparatively small. And so he was saying that the Greek world had some good noble things about it, and then Christianity was sort of the definitive thing. And what's come since is this modern just dullness, and what Chesterton talked about a lot is that people were like this return to sort of hedonism or that kind of paganism, that everyone just sort of satisfy everything, and then actually life is boring, and so people these days are often bored and they're not happy. And Chesterton, he was happy and he could be delighted with simple things,
Very simple things, yeah. And it's just not only that, he was at a time when there was the Puritan movement as well. So it was interesting that his writings, on one hand, he would completely contradict the hedonistic pleasure-seeking for pleasure's sake mentality, and on the other hand, the Puritans would be kind of enraged by him at times, or upset or puzzled by what he would say. I mean, he would smoke a cigar and say grace before smoking it. Like, that was his way of, he would enjoy that cigar and enjoy the simple pleasures of life. And some of his essays, I love reading. One of my favorites is an essay called A Piece of Chalk. He wrote an entire essay that's, was 1,000, 2,000 words about a piece of chalk. And it is one of the most delightful, everything he wrote is delightful, but I just couldn't imagine that you could write something as captivating with such wisdom at the same time that he weaves into the whole thing about a piece of chalk. And he says, I think towards the end, he says something along the lines of, I would have written more about all the other things you would find in your pocket, such as the pocket knife. But the time of great epics is past. Like that for him, a pocket knife was an epic experience. A piece of chalk was an epic thing, was as big, if not bigger, than the grandest of mountains.
Yeah, he was amazed about the simple things just of everyday life. But the thing you said about him and cigars, there's this quote that I love making to everyone. I'll even say this in very mixed company when people where I wouldn't normally broach the topic, like I wouldn't start talking about religion at a company function necessarily. But I'll bring up a quote like this, where Chesterton was talking about the Catholic faith and Christianity in general, but in particular Catholicism, is saying that it's not just a spiritual religion. And he said that the Catholic Church is a thick steak, a glass of stout, and a good cigar. And you can say that people know, people say, oh, that sounds nice, but we're saying it's being realistic, and that it's not, sort of the modern thing is everything is, just about, we're just a body, that's all there is. Our mind is just brain, just neurological functioning. There's nothing more to life than that. And then there's the other view that everything is spiritual and the body doesn't matter. And he said, no, this is, the Christianity is about realism.
I think the fascinating thing with him, as Dave was saying, is that you read his writings, you get the sense of a wonder of a child and almost the mischievousness of a child. But at the same time, I think he was given a great gift of wisdom, like the wisdom of Solomon, of I think among the greatest philosophers and theologians that the world has ever known. He wrote a book on St. Thomas Aquinas, who was just this unbelievable writer and so systematic. He dictated the entire thing while he was dictating a couple other essays and a couple other books, and I think he did it in the span of, it was a couple days, something like that.
Is that right? Yeah.
And with no notes. He just decided to write the book, and he did.
I'm just going to dictate this book.
Gilson and a number of great Catholic philosophers and theologians have said that this book on Thomas Aquinas is one of the greatest books ever written. Now, it's fairly small, but the wisdom that he packed into that, but yet the childlikeness at the same time, is, I think, what makes him such an unbelievable character and a gift to the church.
And the name is funny, the dumb ox,
the
right?
dumb ox,
which was
exactly.
I guess that's what
he was
called when he was
yeah.
a kid, right? Aquinas, not Chesterton, but yeah, no, I'd say he likes these contrasts, and the modern world just wants to just cut right to the simple answer, right? And he wasn't afraid to look at the difficult.
But he would look at it simply yet, which is a fascinating thing. That he would tackle everything. He tackled political issues, economic issues, philosophical, theological. He was into criticism, art criticism, all that. And he did have a simplicity,
and he wrote mystery novels.
but yet he tackled the most complex of issues. And he wasn't afraid to go either way. In fact, he could just handle whichever topic it might be, and love doing it, obviously.
Well, why is he not as popular, do you think? If he has such a response to all these things, and he has so many things that he talks about with...
I think from my standpoint, there's two reasons. One is that we live in a world which has become very, very specialized. We go to university now, and most people, they don't understand the concept of a broad liberal arts education. It's you go to school and you study your specific trade or specialization, you become an expert in that. So our world has become very compartmentalized. Chesterton was never compartmentalized. He wrote about everything. If he was writing an essay on politics, he would start talking about economics, he'd start talking about faith, he would start talking about pieces of chalk, and I talked about earlier. So you can't, because of that, I think our modern world doesn't know what to do with him. And the second thing is he actually...
He doesn't fit in a discipline, so you can't do your research on him. How do you publish that, right?
And he wrote so much. I mean, he was just an absolutely prolific writer. And I think the other thing is that he argued against materialism, he argued against consumerism, he argued against so many things that are happening against the family, he argued against atheism, and he argued so well that our modern world, quite frankly, does not have the tools and is incapable of challenging him, because to argue with Chesterton is to lose. So our modern world does not like to lose when it comes to these what supposedly advances in every sphere of life. And Chesterton is just kind of doesn't put the brakes on, but says, "Whoa, we need a perspective here. We need an eternal perspective, and we need to see the truth." I don't think our modern world can handle that, and they don't know what to do with him because he put everything so well.
Well, what kind of influence has Chesterton had on you? Like your way of life and maybe the way you think, the way you work, the way you raise your children, right?
You know what? For me, it would just be a thing of strengthening a message that I was already coming to accept. And he's one of a few writers that really had an effect on me. C.S. Lewis is another one, right? And Chesterton I'm sure he wouldn't have claimed to be like, I'm presenting the Chesterton view of Christianity or something. Like it's one of those things that, like, when we were talking about having this discussion, I was thinking about there's so many things about him that it just pervades, it just reinforces my understanding and things of the faith. But yeah, it's hard to pinpoint one thing to me because he covered so much.
Absolutely. For me, along the same lines, I find that when I'm having days where I'm a little confused, or I'm stressed out, or I'm having doubts about this or that element of the faith, or just things just don't make sense, I literally can pull out any book of Chesterton's, and it does not matter. Open it up, and it's what I need to hear. Because just all of a sudden, it's like the words just fill me with the joy that Chesterton has, and are just a reminder. Whoa, perspective, and he's done that for me so many times. And I'm newly married, and one quote I love of his is that just his approach to relationships. He says, "Marriage is a duel to the death, which no man of honor should decline." It's just like he's like, marriage is a challenge, it's a struggle, but it's an honorable, it's a beautiful, it's a wonderful thing. And he just kind of takes all of the problems that we might have and just puts it all in perspective, and it's a joy. And I think for me, it's having Chesterton in my life has been great, and my wife would say the same thing. She's every now and again, if I'm a little down or something like that, she's like, "Luke, go read some Chesterton."
Yeah.
Can you tell us what we should start off with for those who haven't read Chesterton or want to remember those great quotes that you've just sputtered, and any sort of great books that you want to suggest for us?
Well, this is just from the introduction. I read Orthodoxy, and that one I think that was basically his autobiography. And in the intro to that, it said this is the one to start with, and then you move on to the Everlasting Man and others. So that's sort of it's his journey of various philosophies that he rejected and how he came to become a Christian. So I think that's the one. And then things written about him, like from Peter Kraft and others, would help to draw out the message, and then you move on to reading Chesterton himself.
Absolutely. There's so much. It really, I'm of the mind that it doesn't matter where you start as long as you just pick them up. A friend of mine just recently read her first Chesterton that she's ever read. She just went to the bookstore, picked out the book that she had found, and just wrote me a week later just marveling that she hadn't read anything about or by him before.
Which one was that? Which book?
It was a Father Brown book that she hadn't read, and then I sent her the essay on a piece of chalk that I'd mentioned earlier, and she just loved that. So there's actually a website in the U.S. There's a group called the Chesterton Society in the U.S. It's chesterton.org, and I think they've got a fantastic summary. They've got a number of quotations on all of the topics that he covered. And then they've got a kind of a bibliography for beginners. So Chesterton.org is a fantastic site, and I'll even go there just to read different essays that they put up on there and whatnot. So that would be a great way of doing it as well. But you know what? It doesn't matter where you start. Just read something of his. That's what I think, and it'll pull you in and draw you in, and you will know where to go.
Well, fantastic. I hope that happens to all of our viewers. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
We hope the time will soon come when the wisdom and the commonsensical arguments of G.K. Chesterton will make more of an impact on today's society. But until then, I'd like to ask you, have you read any Chesterton? Would you like to read any? Do you have any favorite quotes or quips from him? Or do you have any questions or comments about today's Focus show? Let us know by sending us an email, focus@saltandlighttv.org. Once again, I'm your host, Mary Spicani for Catholic Focus. We'll see you next time.